Lancia was once a brand for people who wanted more than just a regular car. It was a marquee where engineering experiments were valued above market compromises, and where technical thinking often went ahead of what buyers actually expected. By the early 2000s, that had changed, and instead of technology and style, Lancia was becoming associated more with decline. At the same time, the Thesis, their last grand sedan, can hardly be called a weak car. It was one of the most technically complex and elegant Italian cars of its time, yet it still ended up failing. And today we're going to look at why that happened. At the beginning of the 2000s, the European car market was going through a period of sharply increasing competition. Mercedes was preparing a new generation of the E-Class, BMW was experimenting with radical design, and Audi was rapidly strengthening its position through technology. At the same time, the crossover segment was growing, gradually pulling buyers away from traditional sedans, while the premium segment was increasingly becoming the territory of German brands. On the less premium side of the market, there was plenty of choice. Alfa Romeo 166, Volvo S80, and their competitors were all taking their share of the European market. Naturally, the question comes up, is there room for a car as proudly distinctive, deeply Italian, and objectively expensive as the Thesis? At first glance, the answer is no, but Lancia believed there was still a place for it. Lancia first presented its vision of the future sedan's design in 1998 with the concept car Lancia Dialogos. The project was based on an innovative idea of a biodynamic car. This is how the project leaders described it. Lancia Dialogos is a place to live in, not just a means of transportation, a space where materials and technology provide both a sense of well-being and aesthetic pleasure. And the concept really was striking and unusual in its style. But it was still just a concept, and concept cars can be extremely extravagant, often having only a loose connection to production models, and sometimes none at all. That's why, when the production Lancia Thesis was revealed in 2001 at the Turin Motor Show, it genuinely surprised people. First, because its design was almost directly carried over from the concept with only minimal changes. And second, because that design looked unlike anything else on the market at the time. The reaction from the automotive press and the general public was mixed. But the most important thing is that no one was indifferent. Some people absolutely loved the Thesis, praising Lancia for its boldness and for taking such a step, especially at a time when the industry was moving toward maximum standardization, and in some cases, even uniformity. Lancia wasn't copying the Germans, and it wasn't trying to look like anyone else. Others, on the contrary, were quite harsh in their criticism, calling the car completely disproportionate and overstyled. They didn't like the heavy use of chrome or the retro influences, arguing that buyers in this segment expected a restrained and confident design, while Lancia was offering eccentricity. But regardless of the opinions, the debut of the Thesis did not go unnoticed. The Thesis was built on the Type 841 platform, a heavily reworked version of the Lancia Kappa architecture, which, due to its specific nature, never saw wider use within the Fiat group. That specificity came from its complex construction and strong focus on comfort. Type 841 turned out to be too expensive and too niche to be used in other Fiat or Alfa Romeo models, where the priority was already shifting towards standardization and cost reduction. This can likely be seen as a mistake by Lancia's management, because in the modern automotive world, a unique platform is a luxury that only a few can afford, and Lancia was clearly not one of them. Even in those more ambitious years, Fiat could hardly justify such costs, and yet they went ahead with it, creating a car that stood out for its remarkable refinement. The Thesis featured a complex multi-link suspension both at the front and the rear, along with adaptive Sachs dampers with continuous damping control. The car clearly prioritized ride comfort, effectively smoothing out road imperfections and isolating the driver from the surface. Its behavior wasn't aimed at sportiness, but rather at calm and confident driving, where the focus was not on performance, but on a sense of refined serenity. The engine lineup of the Lancia Thesis was quite diverse and largely reflected the engineering traditions of the Fiat group. Buyers were offered two gasoline V6 engines, a 3-liter 24-valve unit from the Busso family, as well as a later 3.2-liter version. There were also inline 5-cylinder gasoline engines with displacements of 2.0 and 2.4 liters, along with a 2.4-liter 5-cylinder 20-valve turbo diesel. As for transmissions, the car initially used a 5-speed automatic gearbox, which was later replaced by a more modern 6-speed ZF automatic. Manual gearboxes were also available, but most buyers chose the automatic, which suited the character of the car. Inside, the Lancia Thesis greeted you with an atmosphere best described as an Italian living room. Poltrona Frau leather, natural wood trim, and soft ambient lighting created a sense of warmth and comfort, something quite rare in a segment usually defined by a more restrained and colder aesthetic. Today, this interior is seen as a clear example of the early 2000s Italian approach, with a focus on materials and atmosphere rather than showcasing technology. The center of the dashboard was occupied by the infotainment screen, complemented by classic instruments with soft backlighting. At the same time, the Thesis did offer modern features for its time: adaptive cruise control, keyless entry, and a Bose sound system. Prices for the Thesis started at around €35,000 for the base version and went up to about $55,000 for a fully equipped V6 model. So if the car was that good, even in the eyes of many critics, why did it fail? There's no single answer here. The failure of the Lancia Thesis was the result of a whole combination of strategic miscalculations. Lancia's strategists believed their car could compete in the premium segment with the Mercedes-Benz E-Class, BMW 5 Series, and Audi A6. In theory, this didn't look completely unrealistic. The Thesis really was technically advanced and focused on a high level of comfort, while its price was roughly 15 to 20% lower than its German rivals. In practice, though, this positioning had no real chance of success. By the early 2000s, the Lancia brand had already lost its premium status and had become a pale shadow of its former self. Even stronger and more established brands struggled to compete with the German Big Three, and for Lancia, which was already on the edge of decline, this was a losing game from the start. Another problem was the lack of truly powerful or sporty versions. Compared to its rivals, the engines felt restrained, and the front-wheel drive layout was seen as a compromise in a segment where buyers expected rear-wheel or all-wheel drive. As a result, for part of the audience, the Thesis came across as too soft and lacking character. In the end, the market quickly put everything in its place. In reality, the Thesis ended up in the same space as cars like the Saab 9.5, Volvo S80, and Alfa Romeo 166, exactly where Lancia objectively belonged. But even there, another problem appeared. The Thesis had neither a price advantage nor a strong enough image. The situation was made worse by the brand's perception. By 2002, Lancia had almost disappeared from most European markets. In Germany, the brand was seen as unreliable. In the United Kingdom, it wasn't present at all, and in other countries, interest was minimal. The automotive press, especially in Britain, treated Lancia with a mix of nostalgia and skepticism. This was no longer the era of Stratos or Fulvia, but rather an attempt to bring back the past without having the resources to do so. Some journalists were openly dismissive of the Thesis, describing it as little more than a rebadged Fiat with delusions of grandeur, mostly expressed through its extravagant design. Even in Italy, sales were weak. In its best year, 2002, just under 11,000 cars were sold, after which demand quickly declined. Over the entire production run from 2002 to 2009, only about 16,000 units were built. Against this background, even its closest competitors looked far more successful. Alfa Romeo 166 sold around 100,000 units over its life cycle, while the Saab 9.5 and Volvo S80 were selling tens of thousands each year, reaching total volumes in the hundreds of thousands. Did the Lancia Thesis have a chance to avoid failure? Yes, it did. It still wouldn't have become a hit, but such a dramatic collapse could likely have been avoided. For that to happen, Lancia would have needed to act more pragmatically from the start. First of all, it would have meant stepping away from direct competition with the Mercedes-Benz E-Class, BMW 5 Series, and Audi A6, and focusing instead on a narrower segment that better matched the brand. Instead of a complex and expensive platform, a simpler and more scalable architecture would have made more sense. That would have reduced production costs and allowed the car to be offered at a noticeably lower price, creating a real pricing advantage. Finally, the model lacked a true halo version, a more powerful and dynamic variant. Not for sales volume, but for perception. The Thesis didn't even have a symbolic flagship that could strengthen the appeal of the entire lineup. In the end, the Thesis could have become a relatively affordable and distinctive car with clear positioning. And when a product is clearly defined, it will always find its buyer. And yet, those who own the Lancia Thesis often spoke about it with something close to fanatical respect. They appreciated the Thesis not in spite of its flaws, but in many ways because of them. For them, it was the opposite of everything the market had to offer, and design played a key role in that. Some saw it as strange, even ugly. Others found it interesting and distinctive. But for its owners, the Thesis felt genuinely special. Its symbolic value also matters. The Thesis became the last true flagship of Lancia, a car conceived and developed as a Lancia, not as a rebadged Chrysler. In a way, it represented the end of an era of automotive romanticism, something the industry was beginning to lose at the turn of the millennium. The Thesis can be seen as a peak not only for Lancia, but for an entire approach to car making. Cars where aesthetics mattered more than algorithms, and where the quality of the ride was more important than acceleration numbers or lap times. Where luxury was measured in silence, softness, and a sense of comfort. That is why today the Thesis is seen as a modern classic. Not because it was successful, but because it dared to be different in a world that increasingly rewards conformity.